Alright, welcome to video 8. Let's take a look at some more advanced uses of pivot tables. We're going to start by grouping fields and we'll see a little bit of familiar content, but we'll show you a couple of other examples. We want to look at how do we group different dates. Let's look at grouping numerical ranges like ages and a billing amount. So this first task I've got for you is to group dates by month. The main data we have available is in this raw data worksheet, and it is called a table named encounter. So let's go ahead and keep this pivot table actually here in the grouping fields worksheet, and I'm going to start this in a different way so you can see another opportunity for how to create a pivot table. I'm down here where I want the pivot table to go, selecting cell B29. I'm going to go up into insert and then the pivot table options and say from table or range, because I know this table is named encounter or ENC. It's my short always for encounter. That's what I'm going to insert, and in the existing worksheet I've got it already selecting B29. When I hit OK, I've got a pivot table started right where I wanted it based on the data that's over here in a table that's already prepped and set up for me. So we've got it here, and I want to work on grouping by month as an example. So let's go ahead and do something like count the number of admissions by going and taking the name column, putting it in values, and we'll do a count of those names. We've got these 299 admissions. Now let's find our date field, which is the date of admission that we are going to add into the rows section. And by default, it does that sort of standard action where it creates it by year and month and day. I'm going to do Control Z in order to reverse that default and just do actually by date of admission. Now I'm going to show you how to group a date field like this sort of from scratch. We're going to right click on the date column in the pivot table. We're going to choose group, and then we're going to choose year and month. Alright, now we've got the number of admissions by year and month. That's one primary way that we can look at how do we group. Next, let's look at another example we briefly looked at before. That would be to do numerical values by some sort of range. And so now I'm going to go ahead and keep this number of admissions out here as the value, but I want to do this by groupings of ages and groupings of the actual total billed amount. And so I'm going to get rid of the date element because that's no longer what I'm trying to work on. I want to start by getting ages, and I'm going to pull age down into the rows section. Now this is going to represent each individual numbered age that's there and how many admissions happen. So we had 4 19-year-olds admitted. But that's not really what I wanted to share. With a widespread dimension like this, like age, this really wouldn't be helpful or useful information. In order to make this useful, I'm going to group it. When I group a numerical column, I do it in the same way, and by right-clicking and choosing group, I'm going to see that it's already chosen to start this grouping from 19, which is the youngest age group in our data set. I'm going to override that because I'd like it to start at 0 years of age, and then I'm going to go all the way up to 100, because let's presume this data set may continue to expand and we might see values as high as 100. And let's go by every, let's say, 20 years. And so now we've got the number of admissions for our 0 to 19-year-olds, our 20 to 40-year-old, 20 to 39, 40 to 59, so on and so forth. So you've seen that example before. This is a useful way to summarize a numerical column in the same way that you can summarize some of these other dimensions, like let's say blood type or something else that has just a limited small number of unique values. It can be hard with a numerical column because there can be a whole wide range of values. This helps you to summarize that quickly. Let's show one other example of how we might do that, even with something that would traditionally be used as a value. So something like our billed amount, or I've actually changed it in this example to be called cost. So I'm going to take cost and put it actually as a column. And again, this is a really confusing, wide, and not very helpful way to visualize this data. However, if we were to choose to group that, we can do something that's a lot more readable. So this is going to default to count from $0 or our minimum dollar value up to our maximum, and I'm going to override that just so we have a little more uniformity. It looks like our highest amount is 49,000, and so let's go ahead and make this 50,000, and I'm going to increment by 10,000. Okay, so now we see the number of admissions for different age ranges split up into the cost range from $0 to $10,000, 10,000 to 20,000, so on and so forth. So there you go. You have a couple of examples of how you can group data in pivot tables in order to help summarize and create better information instead of just a ton of data. That's a really common need that we have for using pivot tables, is to summarize and make things viewable and understandable. All right, let's take a look at using calculated fields with pivot tables. I'm going to insert a pivot table down here in the same worksheet in the way that I did before. So I'll go to the Insert tab on the ribbon. I'll go to Pivot Table from Table or Range. I know the name of my table. I named it, and I'm going to put it right here in this existing worksheet. So I've got a pivot table started here. The second part of what I'll ask you to do is summarize this measure that we're going to create, or this calculated field, by the insurance provider. So let's go ahead and choose that right away from the beginning. Then we'll build our calculated field. So we're going to do a calculated field that would be something that comes up in my day-to-day, where I'm looking at some sort of rate per 1,000 patients. So we have a table that has, when an abnormal test result happens, there's a 1, otherwise it's 0. You can see that in the table and go investigate that if you'd like. And we've also got the number of patient days in the length of stay. So the sum of that length of stay is patient days. So we can create an equation here like the sum of our abnormal test results divided by the sum of our total patient days times 1,000 gives us the rate of abnormal test results per 1,000 patient days. And so we're going to go ahead and insert that equation into a calculated field. So the way we do this is click somewhere within the pivot table, go up to pivot table and analyze, go ahead over here in the calculations section to the field items and sets, and right up top is a calculated field. There, I've actually got it here, the abnormal test per 1,000. I'm going to delete it so you can see a little bit of the process. I'm going to write this formula up here as if I were in a formula bar. And I'm sorry, the size is a little small. You're going to have to squint, but it is going to be equal to the sum of abnormal test result, which is a field down here that I need to find. It is above abnormal test result, and I can either double click it or click insert field. Now of note, if I didn't know how to write this out and I just started typing, I wouldn't realize you actually need a single quotation around names of fields like this that have spaces in them. So you'll see sum of abnormal test result there divided by the sum of our length of stay, which is right below it. I'm going to double click it this time. We'll take that times 1,000, and I'm going to insert that into our table because it is now one of my fields, abnormal tests per 1,000. All right, now I don't like the way this is formatted, so I'll show you that as an option. The way to format the field that is in the pivot table, instead of just formatting the cells, because that might not stick, or the pivot table may change its size or how you represent it, the best way to do that is come here to the little caret next to the field in values, choose value field settings, go to the number format in this dialog box, and then format it the way that you'd like it. I'm going to make this a number with, let's say, 1 decimal place after it. So when I hit OK and OK, now we've got that formatted in the way that I would like. So now you've seen an example of how to create a calculated field and put it into a pivot table. We have the rate of abnormal tests per 1,000 patient days by insurance provider here in the table. So this is taking the skill set of using the pivot table together with a couple of its other capabilities to really dive into some next level build of metrics and ways that we can create information, because now that that equation is built, we can look at that same rate over all of those dimensions that become interesting. Let's look at it over admission type and insurance provider, or we can take admission type over to the columns, and very quickly we get this unique kind of profile of where this sort of abnormal test result rate may be highest amongst different insurance providers and the way that the patients get to us. So just pointing out, sharing some of the capabilities that pivot tables open up as a somewhat advanced tool here in Excel. Now I'm going to copy and paste this because it's already quite useful to us, and in the next sheet I just want to show you some different capabilities where I'm not concerned about you learning how to build a pivot table, a 5th, 6th, 10th time. You are welcome to do that yourself, but you could also just copy and paste so you can learn this one new mechanism of pivot tables with me. So that mechanism is two things: slicers and timelines. So accessing them starts by clicking somewhere in the pivot table, going up to the ribbon here and choosing the pivot table analyze, and you'll see in the filters section that both of the options we're looking for are right here. So we're going to start by just adding a slicer. Now when I say add slicer, it pops up a menu of how would I like this, what would I like to slice over. So we've got insurance provider and admission type here in the data, but let's say we wanted to give the ability to go ahead and slice this over blood type or over medication, for example. I'm going to click OK, and now we've got medications and blood type here in this really interesting new type of window that we haven't seen before. This is a slicer, and the basic way that it works is it is connected to the pivot table that we've created it from, and when I make a choice in this slicer, the pivot table will automatically update to reflect that choice. And so you can see that this even speeds up our sort of rate of discovery even further, where we can very quickly have a whole bunch of very unique types of questions without rebuilding the pivot table. This is especially useful for end users. If you're putting it in front of somebody that you know isn't going to be building the pivot tables themselves, but may want access to make unique questions of the data, like let's see by these top 4 blood types and these 3 medications, what is that abnormal test rate? I'm choosing multiple selections here just by picking one, holding down the control button, as you can see in the bottom here where it shows my keyboard actions, and selecting those. You could also select a range by holding one or clicking one, holding shift, and then clicking the bottom of a range. And you see it chose all of those. You also have you can turn this multi-select on and off. You can completely remove that filtering from the table. Very, very powerful mechanism, especially for end users to continue to ask questions of the data that you've presented or made available to them. So now you've got slicers here for this pivot table, and let's add one other element that would allow us to filter and look at this data pretty dynamically, and so that is the timeline. It's added in the same way. Go to the Pivot Table Analyze tab of the ribbon and insert timelines. Now it knows the dates that we have in our data, so those are the only things it presents. I'm going to choose discharge date here, and you're going to see that what pops up is a window that shows a range of dates across months right now, and if you look, it also has at the top of that actually years, and so this is quite a few choices to make. I would typically not put this many choices in front of an end user unless I could display it in a way that's more useful. So let's swap over to years instead. So now you can see that this is a little more compact set of options and provides a better user interface. And so what's available here is the user can choose with this bar to only look at this information over different time periods, just 2022, 2023, 2021 through 2023, all sorts of variability. So imagine the flexibility this adds. Hey, I've got this metric for you, but you can look at it just over the last 4 years, by most of the blood types except one that you might want to exclude for some reason. And you could exclude 2 medications because they might not be relevant to the problem you're solving. So that's a really unique capability that pivot tables have that I really like to show. All right. Next, I want to talk about relationships. Not the type you're thinking. This is an Excel relationship. Not our relationship to Excel, but relationships within Excel, the tool itself, and how it gives you the ability to take tables that are related and go ahead and actually tell Excel how they're related. And from there, it allows you to pivot in new ways. So this really extends your capabilities as an analyst because it allows you to build miniature data models from separated data sets. All right, so let's take a look at how this looks. I've got a secondary data set. Now, I've got the raw data, which we've been using all along. I've named it encounter, and it has a complementary data set here that is patient IDs. And so you notice that in all this data we've been using, there's no like patient identifier. This can happen sometimes where you don't actually have the identifier you need or some other small data element. That may be kept in a different table or someone else may be able to help provide it. So this is the example I've put together where we've got the raw data, but the patient ID is stored in this other table, and I have named this table patient underscore PAT underscore ID. So these are the 2 tables that we're trying to connect, and the column that they have in common is this patient name. The patient IDs table has a patient name, and our encounter table has a column named that is just name. So we need to make a relationship in order to be able to pivot these things and combine this data in a direct way without using some of the longer form clunky ways like lookups. So the way that you can do this in Excel is through a relationship. So we can go ahead and find this area in the area of data, and to come over here to the data model icon and choose that caret to open it up, because in there is relationships. That's what I want to choose. You can see that in this workbook I don't have any relationships that are active, so I'm going to create a new one. You can kind of get the sense of what we're trying to do. We're trying to choose for the encounter table what is the key or the column, the field that we're trying to match on. If you remember, the name of that column was just name. And on the patient ID table, we had another column that was patient name. So now that is the relationship we want to set up. We want Excel to know that those 2 things are connected. So this is an active relationship that we have just built, and I'm going to go ahead and close it. So now let's build a pivot table with the combined data. So we can use the data model to create a pivot table summarizing something like costs by patient, and we can have the patient identifier actually available. And so we'll go to that insert, we'll choose where we want to put this, which is down here just at the bottom so we can work in it. We'll go to that insert, and we're going to use the pivot table drop down here because I actually want to choose from data model as the opportunity here. It's not a single table or range. It's from this data model, that I've got sort of set up. So it's going to ask me where I want that to go, and it is to this existing worksheet I already had selected. And now we've got pivot table 7. So you can see that what comes up for us to be able to use is not just the fields from the encounter table, but the fields from both tables. So this is the type of thing we can do. We can take a record from the encounter table and return from the patient ID table where that matches up. So now we have and relationship. Might take several minutes to that did not have the result. Table may be needed. I don't know why this is doing that. I would have expected to see something really different. It's not a sum. I want it here. this. Done that way. Well, let's look at it. Hues. Crap, I'm gonna have to come back and edit all this shit together. Alright, let's look at our last topic, which is multiple consolidation of ranges, or data models, essentially. So this is the more advanced capability that Excel offers when you need to do something very similar to a lookup and find information that is in two different tables, and you need to connect those without putting them into the same table. So it could be done with a lookup for this simple example that I'm giving you, but it's most useful when you've got two wider tables of information in which you don't want to do a lookup in each table in order to get that information back and forth between the two. Here's a common example where this would come up in my world. If I'm working with a big enough data set, I would rather go ahead and make this relationship instead of setting up a lookup. And so we're going to do that with the example of IDs. So what I have in here is two different pieces of data. We've got a table that is named encounter that has just a patient ID on it. And separate from that, we have a table that's named patient ID that is on the patient IDs tab. And it has both the patient ID and the patient name. This is a really common need for me. I know I have this available to me in another table, and I can connect it through the ID, which is a patient ID. So instead of doing a VLOOKUP, I'm going to go ahead and utilize a relationship. Now, I've pointed out a different relationship here, but you will absolutely see how to accomplish this. It is quite straightforward. So we access it through the Data tab up here in the ribbon. We go to this green icon and come down to Relationships. Say New, and then choose the table that you want to get connected, which is the Encounter table, and the column there is the Patient ID. Then what does it have a relationship to? It has a relationship to this Patient ID table. I'll choose that, and it's already thinking for me that it must be the column that is named the exact same from that table. So I'm going to hit OK, and now you can see we have an active relationship between these two tables. So I'll close this, and I'll show you how this comes through and becomes visible through a pivot table. So I'm going to go insert a pivot table. This time we're going to choose from data model. It's going to put it here in the existing worksheet where I had the active cell selected. And what you see on the right hand side in these pivot table fields is not a list of all of the different fields included in both tables. You see each table listed separately and the fields that are in it. So this would enable us to go ahead and do something like give me the patient name from that patient ID table, and we could even grab something like the patient ID from this table and the age. And so these are both summing. This is not really what we're looking for. Let's go ahead and say I wouldn't want the sum in case a patient is listed twice and thus their ID is listed twice. Let's just take the minimum. and then it should return their ID because it's the same on every record, so the minimum will come through pretty clearly. Same thing for age. Let's change that to minimum. And so now we've got by the patient ID, what is their minimum age. We've done that quickly by connecting two tables through a relationship. All right, that's video 8. I can't wait to see you in the next video.